Hey cousins, with today being 2 years from the October 7th attacks, I think it's really, appropriate for us to talk about some of the underlying issues that are still resonating here in our country with some of the recent events. Now, part of what I mean by that is if you look at my comment sections or every single tweet that I make, you will see all these people trying to spam me saying that I must be getting paid $7,000 per post because I have the audacity to be a Zionist. But what's so interesting about that, and what's so interesting about this witch hunt that people have regarding people who are pro-Israel, I just want to know, where is that due diligence when it comes to who's being paid by countries like Qatar? I see these people constantly talk about Israel so bad because they are defending themselves and fighting in a literal war. But where is that energy when it comes to the awful things that we have seen come from radical Islam, not even just to Israel, but throughout Western society in these last 5 to 10 years? Now, with that being said, a situation that keeps being overexposed for whatever reason is the now infamous Hamptons trip that about 30 influencers, including myself, went to with Charlie Kirk and Bill Ackman. And everybody keeps trying to hyperfixate on the fact that we discussed Israel, as well as a bunch of other topics. But the main topic, the main reason that we were there, I feel like people are completely overlooking what the main focal point was of this entire, let's say, seminar, this debating workshop, whatever you want to call it. Nobody wants to talk about what Charlie Kirk was talking about. And it's the fact that radical Islam is arguably the biggest threat to Western society today. So I want to dive deeper into that. You guys know the vibes. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Welcome to Respectfully. So cousins, like I said, there just simply seems to not be a due diligence of the same people who want to constantly accuse me of getting paid to be a propagandist shill. Where's that energy at with these Middle Eastern countries that are so against Israel? Because even my friends that are skeptical of Israel, or my friends that have way more criticisms of Israel than I do, because yes, I have my own criticisms of Israel. Y'all just talk about, oh, why don't you ever talk about what you don't like about Israel? It's like, I have. It just doesn't go viral because it doesn't fit your narrative, you musty anti-Semites. But that being said, where is that energy at when it comes to places like Qatar? Because even, like I was saying, even my friends that are skeptical of Israel, they now feel like the hatred against Israel and the hatred against Zionists, it's forced. Now, you have countries like Qatar that is notorious for, allegedly, paying people up to like 1,000 times their typical rate in order to get into good favor. Now, I will say this is alleged. I have not seen the receipts of it necessarily, but I've looked into it enough to feel like I have traced the track record pretty well. So, of course, take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But you do have people like the comedian Theo Von. Now, I have nothing against Theo Von. I've met Theo Von. He's very nice, very funny, way older than I thought he was, but no shade. But, Theo Von, nice guy. I don't find it to be a coincidence that all of a sudden, because yeah, he dabbles into politics. He would talk to Trump. He would have these moments. He's the funny guy. But all of a sudden he goes to Qatar and he comes back and he's the most serious person in the world when it comes to hating all over Israel. I find that suspicious. And what I've heard, and I'm not saying this about, necessarily Theo Von, but there are people that I've heard, if they normally get paid $30,000 for a gig or for whatever it is that they do to make an appearance, they will allegedly go to Qatar and get paid $3 million for something that they would typically get paid $30,000 for, and it's to put them in good favor. And I will say, I'm willing to be proven wrong about Qatar. Just like I went to Israel to find out the truth, I'm willing to hear out people that are, let's say, pro-Qatar, or hear out people that want me to visit there. I'm not opposed. Because I want to know what it is that they have to say about the allegations. But nevertheless, and the main thing that I want to dive into today is I have one more thing that I just really want to dive deeper into when it comes to this now infamous Hamptons trip, as some people are referring to it as. As I mentioned before, I feel like it is so overlooked that the main conversation that we were there to have at this Save the West retreat was more pertaining to radical Islam rather than it was about Israel. everybody's hyper fixating about the fact that, again, if you didn't watch the prior episode, it became this huge controversy of people alleging that a bunch of influencers were flown out by Charlie, but for his own intervention to yell at him for not being pro-Israel enough. And now all these people are debating whether or not, Charlie was turning on Israel, turning his back on the cause, which credible sources are saying that wasn't the case. Yes, he had his criticisms, but his criticisms were made known. But what we are told are all these different conspiracies from people that are, on X, on YouTube. And what we're told from law enforcement and from what the facts are showing thus far is that a radical leftist is who murdered Charlie Kirk. That is what I believe, and that's what's being actively investigated right now. And as I've seen these numerous conspiracy theories, I feel like there's about 10% truth to some of them, but a bunch of it is just like filler information and lies and things that it feels like people are just pulling out of their behind. But I do think it is far-fetched to believe that the murderer of Charlie Kirk acted alone. And it is worth investigative journalism from professionals and people with that true skill set. But let us also remember that the FBI is all over it. And I'm not saying that the FBI is the most trustworthy organization in the world, but I do believe that under Kash Patel, they're doing their due diligence. I have my skepticism. Like, I still think the whole thing with Epstein was weird. I don't understand what's happening there. So it's like, yeah, never trust the 3-letter agencies. That energy doesn't go away. But that being said, like, it's a very open case. So to assume that the FBI isn't turning over every stone, I think that that's foolish, but I digress. What's gross to me is that as soon as Charlie was murdered, people immediately took it as an opportunity to blame Israel, which who shot at this point? That's what these people, these like roaches on the internet love to do every single time. Like one of the biggest roaches on X just tweeted today saying that every time something happens, it is in your best interest to point at Israel first. Insane. That is insane. That is like put you in a straitjacket insane. But the people who are now going, and if you haven't seen this, God bless you. You're a lucky person. But there's all these people that are out there trying to blame Erica Kirk, or now even saying that Turning Point USA, they're accusing Turning Point USA of being responsible for Charlie Kirk's murder. And that to me is so shameful and so disgusting and so repulsive. And it's really sad that some of the people that are doing this are claiming to be friends with Charlie, but you are accusing his wife of not grieving enough or for grieving in her own way. I think that's pretty heartless. I think that's pretty inhumane for people to be doing that. Now, this Hamptons trip, the reason it got so much attention, it first started with a fraudulent hit piece from a far left journalist who aligned with far right journalists in order to try to attack people who are pro-Israel. I want to also throw out that journalist has absolutely no talent because some of the information that he put in there is so verifiably wrong. He tried to accuse me of having my trip orchestrated to Israel by Newsmax. It's like Newsmax had nothing to do with it. One Google search and he could have found out that the people who took me on my most recent trip to Israel, that was already public information. So again, a talentless journalist. But then it got amplified by the pretty black lady with a bob. And all I'm saying is that I can understand why people are wanting to look deeper into what actually happened with Charlie. Like I said, I don't think that the shooter acted alone. I think it would be naive and foolish to think that because there is a lot of information that is not tracking. It's not clocking to me. There's a couple of elements of that story that I think are not adding up. But that being said, when we are talking about who is connected to this shooter, why are we not talking about the possible connection of this radical leftist and radical Islam? Now, again, the theme of the Hamptons was Save the West Retreat. And we have talked so much, like collectively as a movement, about what Charlie's views were towards the end of his life, towards his life being taken from him. But why are people not talking about the fact that he was very much hyper fixated on radical Islam, and particularly how Charlie Kirk felt that Islam is not compatible with Western society? He kicked off the summer basically with this tweet. This tweet blew up and was everywhere, where he said Islam is not compatible with Western society. Western civilization. He said that Islam is not compatible with Western civilization, period. That's what he said. Short and sweet. And he stood on that. And then he flew a bunch of influencers out And one of the biggest topic of all the topics that we had our debate seminar about. And when I say debate seminar, what I mean is we were going back and forth on various topics. And Charlie was saying, like, when you argue in this way, it's too emotional. When you're arguing this way, it sounds like moral blackmail. And he was also just wanting to see how we all felt about various issues. But the entire first day was dedicated to talking about how radical Islam is not compatible with the West. And if you haven't been paying close enough attention, or even if you have, a lot of people have not put the connection together that somehow, some way, radical leftism and radical Islam have a lot of connections and a lot more in common than people realize. They both hate Western capitalism. They both identify with this whole Free Palestine movement. They hate all things Israel to a point that is completely deranged. They are very, very intolerant of everything that Western society, especially that Israel represents, including tolerance. They really hate how tolerant Israel is, ironically, considering that these progressives are somehow so anti-Israel. I'll never understand that, really. But then they also love to use fabricated victimhood to justify violence, and they enforce strict moral code that they have just pulled out of their behind, or at least in radical Islam, they pulled it out of the Quran. But the leftists, they are aligning with it in whatever capacity they choose to. And then you have these people that are choosing violence in pursuit of ideological goals. Radical Islam and radical leftists, I need to make a Venn diagram. Y'all know I love a Venn diagram. They have so much in common at this point. It's really insane. So when you say all of that, and you think about the fact that, yes, 90% of these conspiracies that these people are putting out there, I think that they're baseless. But I do believe that if you are going to claim to be turning over every stone, then why have you not looked into what it was that Charlie Kirk was actively speaking on? The last conversation I had with Charlie Kirk was about radical Islam. The last conversation that many people had with him was probably about radical Islam. The last, thing that from my POV that he seemed to be fixated on was radical Islam. So why is no one talking about that? Why are all these people that are claiming to do the investigative work that they don't think that the FBI is good enough at doing, why are they not talking about what Charlie Kirk was pointing to? And if you don't believe me, let's look through his tweets in his last few months of life. So as we look at Charlie Kirk again, in his own words, if you go back to June, because he kicked off the summer talking about Islam is not compatible with Western civilization. That tweet has 68 million views at the time of this video. So it clearly was controversial, but he meant what he said. Next thing you know, he puts up this. Islam is quickly taking over the West. We need a full moratorium. Wake up. And it's a video of a graduation in Somalia. The video says a graduation in Somalia. JK, it's Minnesota. So Charlie, he was not playing any games. Next tweet says this. Says, this is New York. We are being conquered and they are rubbing it in our face. Islam is steadily enveloping the West. Very clear to me, that's July. So then he says, the conservative movement needs to focus more time, energy, and focus on how Islam is rapidly taking over the West. Again, very, very clear, very direct. And then what's next? We have, I don't know how to say that man's name, Ridvan Aydemir, an ex-Muslim who escaped from the cult of Islam and became a Christian, says we must prioritize stopping the influx of Muslims to the West, and we should prioritize deporting explicitly political Islamist organizations and people. I agree, as stated by Charlie. Then we have, Islam is taking over the West. We must stand united against the growth of Islam. And a screenshot of find a job. Sharia law administrator. Crazy. Then we have feminism and Islam working together to strangle the West. And then it's a photo of the reality of Europe, which is a reality I feel like people are not paying enough attention to. He posted an image where it shows abortions and maternity. You have all these women, all these Caucasian Western women in line to get abortions. Black women too. Clock that T. He says how all these Western women are getting abortions while all these Islamic women are, they're there with maternity. It's all these women that are from insinuating here, it's not Western women having babies. Then we have this one. Mass import Islam, destroy America. It's that simple. And I want to play this clip. I want you guys to see what he was responding to. This is a student, a Muslim student at the University of Illinois, Chicago.
America is the cancer. America, the American government, secularism, democracy, capitalism. These are cancers that have spread their illness all over the world. In America, and in the Middle East. In America over here, people have the freedom to, again, like I said before, commit zina, do os fahisha, but when you speak up, it's a problem. Non-Muslims are tired of this cancer. They're tired of the American government. They're tired of democracy. They want to see a new way of life. And as Muslims, we have to understand that we have that new way of life. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was sent as a mercy for all of mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. He was sent as a mercy. Why? Because the way of life he brought will bring that mercy. The way of life he brought will bring that tranquility to Muslims and non-Muslims. Non-Muslims won't have to worry about these issues they worry about now. They won't have to, because Islam is a just religion that has come to be implemented upon.
They're telling us exactly who they are and what they're here to do. How is that not abundantly clear? Okay, and we can play the whole little game of, yeah, like not all Islamists are violent, not all of them are vicious, not all of them want to take over. Enough do. Enough do. And, you know, a theme, and I want to say this too, how Charlie prefaced the conversation that we had about Islam, he essentially said, as conservative commentators, we're not afraid to be called racist. We're not afraid to be called homophobic. Why are so many people afraid to be called Islamophobic? Why are more people not speaking up about people like that student at the University of Illinois, Chicago, that is very clearly in English calling for the Islamification of our country? And as we have seen throughout the world, it is not compatible with Western society, as Charlie has made clear. And I'm not saying to attack Muslims or to hate Muslims or to view every Muslim as dangerous, but I do feel like it is dangerous to have a mass importation of a culture that is not compatible with Western society coming here and making it clear that they don't want to be compatible with Western society. They hate Western society because they hate the West. So when everybody keeps bringing up this Hamptons trip, why are they not bringing up the element of the Hamptons trip where we were talking about how to save the West from radical Islam? To all the investigative journalists, clock that, lean into that. Let's continue in these tweets. Charlie Kirk says, Islam has conquered Britain. We cannot allow the same in America. I'm sure that pissed a lot of people off. Then he has, you hear a lot of pundits fearmonger about the rise of Christian nationalism when right in front of their eyes, Islam is taking over public places and gaining political power. Islam is a fundamental political ideology that aims to conquer us militarily and demographically. And that is in response to a post saying that there are 581 mosques in New York. So why do they still pray on the streets? That's a great question. That's a great question. Charlie was curious about that question too. And then the last one, just 2 days before Charlie Kirk was murdered, Charlie Kirk tweeted, Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. So why are we blaming Israel again? Why are all these investigative journalists, as they call themselves, claiming that Israel is involved? They're claiming that Turning Point USA was involved because Charlie had some criticisms of how Bibi Netanyahu and Israel were handling their PR for the war. Criticisms that a lot of Zionists have. But y'all are claiming to turn over every stone, even pointing at his grieving widow, Erica Kirk, trying to blame her for Charlie Kirk's assassination. But you're not talking about the fact that Charlie Kirk spent his entire summer pushing messaging about the threat of radical Islam, while we simultaneously see that radical Islam and radical leftism are connected. Maybe they've always been. I don't think they've always been, but in the last 5 years, they certainly have been. they certainly seem to have more in common than they don't, fundamentally speaking. This is where Charlie Kirk stood on the issue. So instead of speculating and looking at group text messages where he's clearly angry and, frustrated, which can't blame the guy for being frustrated with all the pressure that he's getting, because I don't know why people are acting like it's a surprise that he might have felt pressure from his donors about certain topics. Welcome to politics. If you think that that's something new, you don't know how politics, nor nonprofits, nor politician campaigns, nor how any of those work. But sometimes you just got to stand on business and be like, you know what? We don't need your donation. We're going to stick to the values of our company. It is what it is. I'm not saying that there aren't some Jewish donors that might have ticked off Charlie Kirk. Okay, those text messages were confirmed to be real. If y'all know what I'm talking about, great. If you don't, you probably aren't as chronically online as me. But again, I just think it's very bizarre that they're so fixated on Charlie having a feud with a couple donors rather than the fact that he had been calling out radical Islam, which, as stated in the name, is very keen on being radical and are very open about the fact that they will choose violence in order to push an ideology. So last thing I'm going to say about it is, if you want credibility as someone that is turning over every stone, then maybe you should look at who's being funded by countries like Qatar or any other place with the Islamic Brotherhood, and what connection could radical Islam potentially have with the radical leftists who murdered Charlie Kirk. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you, cousins, for tuning in for another episode. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will see you soon.